Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I hope you all have your electrified cats for the evening. Welcome back. Katie, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
Dustin, how are you doing tonight?
Uh,
Well, the usual.
Dane, how are you doing tonight?
I am fabulous, darling. Fabulous.
Good to know. How are you doing, Brandon? Welcome back.
Very snowed in.
Not the movie, I hope.
Not the movie.
Koto Kabuki Jake, how are you doing?
I too have been dealing with the ups and downs of major out of the blue snowfall.
Well, but you guys have not entirely been covered in snow because obviously you guys have appeared, you may or may not hear the voice of Kyle. Kyle, welcome to the show.
hey, what's up, guys? How's it going?
So tonight we are going to go and discuss the 1989 film that became a cult classic.
Mhm.
Directed by Jeremiah S. Chechik, and written by John Hughes, and starring Chevy Chase, Beverly D'Angelo, and a very young Juliette Lewis. And it stars a typical family who invites their other family for Christmas,
By the way.
a vacation at home. So why don't we start with Katie? Why don't you tell us, was this a first-time watch for you?
This was absolutely not my first time seeing this movie. I probably couldn't count the number of times I've seen this movie, so it was certainly a rewatch for me. This is one that I grew up on and has been watched in our family around Christmas time for years and years. I own a DVD copy of it. You know, it's just one of those like staple movies that's in the collection. So I've seen it many, many times. My overall impressions of the film, um, it's kind of just it has staying power for me. It's such a Christmas tradition in our family, and it's such a fun movie that we've all enjoyed for years that it's just kind of one of those, I don't know, one of those go-to films. Like, I guess I could compare it to some of the other National Lampoon's Vacation movies, which I guess it's probably my favorite of all of them because it's the one I saw the most growing up. But probably not considered like the best of all the films. I've heard it argued that the first, National Lampoon's Vacation is a better film than this one, but I do believe this is the highest grossing of all the National Lampoon Vacation films. So I don't know. I just really like it. It's a fun movie. It's a tradition in our family and something that I just grew up on. So, yeah.
Going over to Dustin, why don't you? Was this a first-time watch for you?
Well, I saw it for the first. I saw The Last House on the Left for the very first time the other day, and despite years of spoilers, I wasn't really ready. Good God. Oh, right, wrong movie. What were we doing again?
National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Oh, right. Well, this is the kind of movie that you see every year, whether you want to or not. Like, it will be on at some point on a TV that you're nearby. So, of course, I have a hard time believing anybody would be seeing this for the first time.
I did.
It's just...
This is the first time I've actually seen it all the way through, from start to finish. I've always seen bits and pieces of it. So,
well, you're freaks.
I've seen the
Anyway,
good parts.
Anyway, The movie just holds. You can watch it so many times because it holds up almost every time. I mean, there's really nothing. It's hard to describe. It's like it's a movie that's always good. Like if it's on, you'll just let it play. You know, like and most of the jokes are a little like goofy now, but for the most part, it holds up really well. So and it's become kind of like a institution every year. So
Okay. Going over to Brandon. Was this a first time watch for you?
Definitely not. This movie has been near and dear to my heart since I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. My mother always had a tradition in the family, going back to her grandmother, of watching, what was it, White Christmas every Christmas Eve, which she had then tried to impart to me. But as a stubborn young man, or actually not even young man, young child, I had also wanted to make a tradition of my own. So I had said, well, I'm going to watch this movie, which she always found hard to watch, which was National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, also every Christmas Eve. Of course, me and my father actually really liked it. And what's funny is that me and my father had a difficult time with White Christmas, so it kind of was something that we bonded over the holidays, and we don't bond over a lot. So that was that to me is a fun thing, and I've been watching it multiple times a year, but every Christmas Eve I managed to find it and watch it. Well, it's a lot easier now; it's in my collection. But I have to look under N, and maybe duck down to the bottom shelf or something. But it's a great film. I've watched it probably in the 60 to 70 time mark. So, and I never really get tired of it every year.
Okay. Moving over to Dane. Was this a first time watch for you?
It was a first time watch all the way through, and I'd seen clips here and there. But yeah, I never actually formally sat down to watch it. I have seen the first National Lampoon's Vacation. I have not seen European or Vegas Vacation or the reboot of Vacation, reboot slash sequel. So this and the first Vacation are those are the only ones I've seen. So just keep that in mind. But I'm familiar with the Griswolds and everything. So anyway. I know that people really love this movie, and it's a staple of their childhoods and everything. And this is just from me having seen it really for the first time all the way through recently. I thought it was, it was okay. It was mostly a lot of unrelated vignettes featuring the Griswolds around Christmas that I'm sure would have resonance with you if you really love the National Lampoon's Vacation films, which, I like the first one okay. I don't like Chevy Chase in front of or off screen. Number one, and number two, it's got a lot of vignettes that are of varying degrees of humor and realism and relatability. But it's not at all like a bad film. It's just one of those things that I think hits a very particular generation of like people that grew up in the 50s who are then looking back on their own families, or people that grew up in the 80s and grew up with the film who then look back now that it's 30 years later. Now I was born in the early 90s, and I didn't grow up with this film, so it kind of puts me at a weird position.
Well, it came out in 89, so
yeah,
I grew up in the 90s with this movie.
okay, but
I probably
again,
didn't see it for the first time till the early 90s.
yeah,
I
well,
didn't see it at all.
well, it's my point is that I think that like this is a problem you run into with Christmas films in general. A lot of the time, they're banking on just by the genres, the definition of it. they're banking on the fact that people will see it initially, but that it'll gain its audience over time, and then it'll become a holiday classic, and it'll just endure and endure. And that is fine, because that's kind of the definition of it, is that it's a tradition. For me personally, I didn't quite feel like it lived up to the hype, just because there wasn't that much of a plot. And it's just mostly, it's a lot of unrelated vignettes, some of which are funnier than others. And by the time it does get something of a plot, it's just kind of, okay. But again, it's hard to talk about, because Christmas movies are kind of like comedies in the sense. Well, now a lot of them are comedies, but like it's the same. But my point is, it's the same kind of rubric you're using, which is that sometimes there are certain comedies they're banking on the fact that they are relatable, and if you can't relate, or not to that degree that the movie wants you to, then it's hard to really get into it as much as the movie seems to want you to, if that makes sense.
I feel like earlier we didn't exactly convey what the movie is about for the 1% of people who haven't seen it. So it's basically the family from the National Lampoon's Vacation series. Like, it's Christmas time, and they're just trying to survive the holidays and do like a traditional Christmas, like their dad, like in Chevy Chase's character's head. But a lot of things go wrong, and so it's basically just a series of, we're gonna try to go get a tree, and that doesn't go all that well. I mean, they get a tree, but problems. And it's just kind of stuff like that. And then there's a running plot line of, like, he's getting his Christmas bonus and what he's going to do with it. So, I mean, I wouldn't quite say it's like a collection of vignettes, so much as it does have, like, stuff happens, like, for a reason, but it's not like an anthology, kind of like the way you were sort of making it sound.
Well, no, I didn't mean it like that. I just mean that there's not that strong of a through line connecting these things. I mean, what is there is not that strong, and I get it. It's not really dependent on that. It's not, a movie like this isn't necessarily that dependent on there being a strong through line. It's just, that's an observation of mine that like movies like this and like A Christmas Story are kind of banking on the fact that this is something that your family presumably goes through, and therefore you can relate to it and like it. And if that's not the case, then it makes it harder to get into it, if that makes sense.
Well, there are lots of movies like that. I mean, The Exorcist is a good example of that, if we talk about a discussion on that. If you have that is a good example on another aspect of relation to it, but that's on a religious source. So, but I can understand what you're saying in that sense.
Well, I mean, horror does fall into that same kind of category of subjectivity, admittedly, because not only is it that, but it's also, like you said, the religious angle, but it's also what do you find scary, and that means different things to different people. So, it's comedies that way, Christmas movies are like that. There's certain genres that the subjectivity factor is always going to play a big part.
It actually sort of ties into my opening joke with like expectations and the hype around like certain around movies, because The Exorcist was something that I'd heard played up like so much, and it was something that just totally like fell flat for me. And then Last House on the Left, I mean, I knew everything about it going in. I knew, like, I didn't know scene by scene, but I knew everything that was going to happen. Like, I know they die.
That's like a typical horror movie.
And it, like, hit me like a ton of bricks anyway. It was like, oh my god, if I saw this, like, totally blind, I would be losing my mind. Like, there was a moment, I almost cried at one point. It was like, holy shit. And then I had to see it like 5 times to get through all the extras on the disc, and like, but the last time it was just kind of like, I cannot take any more of this. Mm-hmm. I actually skipped the R-rated cut, just because I'd seen enough. I'm pretty sure those stuff are different, but
to Jake. Was this a first time watch for you?
Definitely not. This was definitely one that I had seen at least in bits and pieces not long after it came out. I saw it when I was younger. It was one that my mom never cared for at all, but my dad kind of liked it. So we watched it a few times growing up. And of course, it's been in the collection for years. And, you know, I watched definitely nowhere near as often as Brandon has, but I'd say I've probably seen it 20, 25 times, maybe more. I don't know. Uh, but it's interesting because I'm coming to it as Dane was pointing out the rest of the franchise. I don't think I'd seen any of the other vacation films until maybe college, at least not all the way through. I think Vegas Vacation was the first one I saw, other than this one.
I kind
and
of forget they exist.
Yeah.
Don't blame you there.
Well, I prefer to forget the second Christmas Vacation movie, but
Yeah, they're all terrible except for the actual Vacation. Like Vacation is good. All the other one, Vacation and
I
Christmas
don't know.
Vacation.
European Vacation is pretty good. I crack up at European Vacation.
Okay.
There's a lot of good
Oh,
ones.
yeah, I like
Good
European Vacation too.
bits in that one.
It didn't do a lot for me.
Ben Kid, Parliament. When he gets stuck in the roundabout, that's the best thing ever.
And I kind of like the new one, except that they did have a lot of overly crass humor in the modern sense. Like this was more '80s crass humor, which I liked better in a lot of ways. But as far as what Dane was saying about relatability, I worked part time this time of year in a Christmas tree lot. And believe me, I have seen firsthand how insane people get when it comes to their Christmas trees and in general their Christmas shopping. And that whole opening sequence, it's every year when I'm in the lot, the line that runs through my head again and again and again is, Dad, that tree wouldn't fit in our yard. It's not going in the yard, Russ. It's going in the living room. I just love that. And just the whole, Clark, did you bring a shovel?
Did you bring the saw?
Did you bring the saw?
Uproot the tree.
You bring the saw, and it's like, wow, how did he? What? But the whole moment of seeing the tree and the lights, like, look for that moment, and I'm sitting there going, why do people care that much about a tree that's been killed for your entertainment? It does.
Well, here's something I guess I don't quite understand, and maybe I'm missing it.
I'm gonna make a quick point. A lot of the jokes come from like shared experiences that a lot of people have during the holidays. You know, of like, oh, getting the tree, or oh, having to go do shopping, or oh, messing with the lights. You know.
I think I remember the whole if one gold's out, the whole thing goes thing. That's not the case nowadays, but I remember that vaguely, and that was
that was the thing.
I used to have to deal with that myself.
Well, when you first start out as a family, the first thing you learn is not to get a real tree. For the most part, especially if you have someone in your household who cares about your floor.
Right.
I mean, if you bring a real tree into your household, you're automatically going to have stuff with, especially if it's a pine tree.
Mm-hmm.
You have the pine needles that fall to the floor every time the kids come around the tree, and they have to poke at the ornaments, you know. And then, of course,
the ornery relative with the big fat cigar that you have to keep away from the tree. But yeah, I love the humor of the movie. I do agree with the idea that I'm not a big Chevy Chase fan either, but for some reason I'm able to forget it's Chevy Chase when he's Clark Griswold. It's like the one role where I can just, okay, he gets a pass for this one.
Well, and I guess that was what was going to lead me into the next point, which is that, you know, and I did like National Lampoon's Vacation, like the first one. I liked that more because I did see it at a younger age. I'm not like a mega fan of it now. But it's like I could see it. I don't know. It's just like I'd have to watch it again though, just to get in that mindset again. But like, I don't know if I'm alone on this, but I found Clark Griswold to be a very unlikable character, at least to me, and I say that as someone who tends to love unlikable characters in movies. But I guess I get more bugged by characters that I find unlikable that the movie clearly wants me to like or at least sympathize with. And I was just like, you're a really selfish person and a very just self-absorbed, you want it your way. And I know that that's supposed to be the lesson and all that, but it's just like I've seen this guy do this stuff, so many times before. Well, at least in the first movie, and I would assume in the second. Up to that point, it's like you haven't really, the movie is telling me that this guy has learned something, but he clearly hasn't, because this is just who he is, and can't keep it in his pants, pretty much, at least not in his mind.
Well,
And it's just like I don't know. It's just there's not a whole lot for me to really like about him, at least to me.
See, that's funny because I sympathize with Clark Griswold, really. And I think it's because he's he's just going for that like traditional holiday for his family. Like I feel like he really has a big heart. He doesn't always go about it the right way, or like his ideas may be flawed as far as how to give his family the Christmas that he wants to give them, but I think his heart's in the right place, but his comedy of errors getting him there is what makes him likable to me. Like, because nobody really gets that hurt in the movie except for the asshole, like, yuppie neighbors. And we don't like them anyway.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, well, okay.
Feel
I'm
bad
glad
for
you
those
said.
guys.
Well, I'm glad you said that
They're
because
jerks, but they
honestly,
get it right.
well, but here's my point though: is I'm glad you said that because I actually kind of like them more because I mean, sure, they're kind of, I guess you could say,
Rich?
stereotypical. Well, they're stereotypical yuppies, but they, as far as I could tell, they didn't really do anything to deserve the punishment that they got other than just be yuppies, at least as far as I
Well,
could
it
tell.
feels like there's a backstory. And like movies in the 80s
Exactly.
used to not have to tell us everything. So we go in assuming that there's some sort of a feud between these neighbors
I
because
assume, but
his first reaction to them, where are you going to put a tree that big? Bend over and I'll show you. Like you automatically get this idea that there's a feud between these people. And so we're supposed to not like them. And I guess if they're
which
in some
okay,
regards
fine, but
they're relatable, but
You can
yeah.
immediately tell they don't like the Griswolds. Like,
well,
it's
I
really
know that they
obvious.
don't. They probably look down on them or whatever. But I'm just this is, and I don't know. I fully admit I am not a normal person by any stretch of the imagination, and especially when it comes to comedies, and especially when it comes to Christmas films. Like I love Bad Santa, and people will look at me like I'm insane because it's such a messed up movie. But like it knows it's messed up, and that's who it's made for, people who have a messed up sense of humor. But like I'm looking at that and I'm like, okay, so these people are stereotypical yuppies, kind of materialistic and everything, but this guy is like just not a likable person. And as far again, we're not shown much in the way of justifying this kind of behavior towards these people who are not, the nicest people in the world, but I don't think they quite deserved what all they got, at least not to me. But again, it's just like
Well, they're
that's me.
antagonists for our main character.
Yeah, and I get
They
that. It's just
provide
like
some friction, and
yeah,
I don't know if it's all that deep beyond
I'm
that,
probably
really.
I'm probably way overthinking it
I
relative to
think so.
what is
If you look at the
intended to be there.
if you look at the scenes where they are like alone together, like they don't seem to really even like each other all that much. Like they don't seem like good people in any sense.
I mean, I'm not like I'm not saying that I'm like a mega fan of them either, but it's just like it to me it just seemed relatively unjustified. And again, it's because we happen to be seeing the movie through Clark Griswold's eyes that they look that way. I'm sure that if it were their movie, it would be something different. But anyway, the point is that say that fully acknowledging that I am not the typical person in any stretch of the imagination, let alone the kind of person that, yeah, the movie is presenting these people as, oh, they're yuppies, so we hate them, and that's kind of how it's presented. And okay, fine,
snobbish,
but
snob like people.
I guess so, and it's just
And
like, I don't know.
It really is just we need the antagonist, and they're like,
I guess
Hey,
like,
it's just
we don't like them because they're like rudish, because they're like rude and condescending.
but so is Clark in his own way,
As far as any beef they might have with Clark, when Brandon and I were watching this, we were kind of joking about this, but I think it's obvious why they don't like him, and we were kind of joking that like their insurance clause probably, instead of act of God, they probably have an act of Clark in their insurance. At least
Which, okay, one area that I could sympathize with Clark in is, which although he didn't react quite the way I would have, or to the degree that I would have, is that if I had all of these relatives showing up unannounced when I had a lot of plans for a great, Christmas with my family, I would be really mad. Like I would be like through the roof. And so I could sympathize with him on that level, but he was keeping it together a whole lot better than I would,
That scene where the relatives arrive and it's just all this noise.
Yeah. Which, that's a huge, that would be a nightmare.
but that's what he wanted. He wanted the big family Christmas in his home.
Well, and that's great
So
for
it's
those
sort
like
of that
sort of thing.
juxtaposition of both. Like you want that until it's there, and then it's like overwhelming. But
Yeah.
I think that's very relatable for a lot of people. I know I enjoy entertaining people in my house, but when my house is full of people, it can sometimes be really chaotic and stressful. But it kind of goes hand in hand. And one thing that I didn't say when I was first talking about my impressions of the movie that I didn't think of till just now is I think that part of the reason why I like this movie so much is because it's one of the few movies that my entire family was able to laugh at. Like growing up, my mom didn't find the same stuff funny that me and my brother found funny, or that, a lot of times my dad would find the same things funny that we did, but my mom very rarely. And this is a movie that my mom will belly laugh when she watches it. And I think that's probably special to me in some regard because she relates to it on some level and it makes her laugh. And it just has a place in my heart for that reason. And I think
that's
she probably
wonderful.
really relates to the Clark Griswold character. Like my mom was kind of a martyr when we were growing up. She'd work really hard and slave over the stove all day for the holiday meal and, go through all this trouble to decorate and really go out of her way. And then something would go wrong or, there'd be some kind of catastrophe or issue because that's just what happens when you have a house full of people or whatever. And, she's just very much like our Clark. So I sort of relate to him in that way where, maybe his motivations are not 100% pure and innocent or whatever, but he's just doing the best that he can. And I think that shines through.
Well, and that's wonderful. And I'm not
actually,
I just want to be clear. I'm not saying what I'm saying to take anything away from anyone.
And I'm not assuming that you are.
Okay, good. Because and also just for reference, my Christmases consisted of me, my mom, my dad, my brother, and that was it. Maybe my grandparents, if they happened to be deciding to come over for whatever reason, and that was pretty much it. So like my repertoire of Christmas movies tended to be stuff that was pre 1970, I want to say, for the most part. So that's where I'm coming from with it, and that normally would not be that relevant of information if the appeal of the film were not based so heavily on relatability as it seems to be for me, as that seems to be how it comes across. But yeah, I'm not saying what I'm saying to like take anything away from anyone.
Actually, out of curiosity, because we kind of went off on this tangent, has anybody not gotten their first impressions in? I know, Dave, you got sort of, but I don't think I heard any of your first impressions other than this was your first time watching it all the way through.
It is my first time watching it all the way through, and I admit that my this was more of a movie that my father would actually watch, and he'd laugh at. It's just he'd re-say what some of the lines in the film, and it would somewhat turn me off from watching the film with him because I never understood the humor in it. But now that I have seen it, and now that I've seen many films with crass humor and things like that, since I sat down and watched it, I get that, Chevy Chase, and I've seen him in other films too. I've seen him in Caddyshack and Caddyshack 2. I've seen him in Mixed Nuts, and
I really like Cops and Robertsons.
I haven't seen that one.
I enjoy it.
But you have to understand that Chevy Chase actually started out on SNL.
And then he left after 1 year because he decided to be a prima donna.
Yeah.
But regardless, he is a darker comedian. He's an oddball comedian, not as oddball as Will Ferrell is, but he's an oddball. He's got some oddball humor that maybe not everyone can totally relate to, but it works in this film. And I think it boils down to the chaos that happens in the preparation for the Christmas season, and him as a Griswold wanting to show his family a good holiday while having to deal with unexpected guests, and so on and so forth, and things just go wrong. And the thing that I thought that was interesting is there is a horror reference in here.
Oh, that's my favorite thing. I know what you're talking about too. So there's a moment where he, what's he doing? He's preparing the tree to like bring it in, right? He comes out like with the chainsaw wearing a hockey mask, and it's like, oh, this is great. It's actually called Chainsaw. It's referred to as Chainsaw Clark, and there's a Fright Rag shirt with him in that outfit, and there's also a NECA figure, like a clothed NECA figure of Chainsaw Clark too, which I really want to find.
Yeah, if the movie had turned into the Griswold Chainsaw Massacre, I think it would have been awesome. Or more awesome.
What they did with it was awesome enough. Later on he has like a freak out when just the last straw kind of happens.
The other thing that I thought that was quite comical in this film was the part where the cat went over by the wires and was chewing on it, and you obviously expected something to happen, and then of course all you saw was this hole where this creature would have been.
Hey, be careful! We've got a drunk cat listening to this podcast here.
Well, they made that pretty cartoony, I think, because that would have really upset a lot of people if it hadn't. Yeah. Like killing animals is always like a thing in movies, and if it had been any bit more serious, I don't think it would have played very well, and probably would have ruined the movie for a lot of people.
The other thing is that same cat was brought inside of a present.
Yes. The box is meowing.
Which, here's something kind of odd synergy here. Is you had this movie with Chevy Chase and some slight cat.
Wait, were you guys talking about me or no?
Well, the thing that I wanted to ask you, Kyle, is even though I know you haven't seen the movies, since Brandon was saying that.
I think you were talking about the cat about me. Was I the cat?
No.
What are you talking about?
You can meow if you want. But anyways, the thing that I wanted to ask you, even though I know that you haven't seen this film or prepared to watch the film like we have, do you know anyone in your family or know anyone who has seen the film?
Yeah, my parents.
Okay, and from what you know, from what you've seen while you watched them watch it, what was their reactions to the film?
Well, I've seen clips of the film before. I've seen the original Vacation, and I thought it wasn't my cup of tea.
Okay. But what were your parents' reactions to this particular film? You remember any reactions that they did?
Yeah, they were laughing hysterically. They loved the original one. They loved the Christmas one the best. I think it was the Vegas one or the European one they liked the most. But the Christmas one, the Christmas one is probably their favorite one. I would say.
Okay, so you would say that it was definitely a movie that their generation would enjoy.
It's not that. It's not like it's a Wonderful Life is probably their favorite Christmas movie. Wonderful Life, White Christmas, stuff like that.
Okay, cool.
But not this is not their top favorite Christmas movie, I would say, but it's one of them.
The thing I was trying to illustrate before, which is kind of a weird coincidence, is so you have this movie with Chevy Chase, who is well known for being very much a prima donna when it comes to being a comedian, and you have cat antagonism in it, and then you also had Christmas with the Cranks with Tim Allen, who's another prima donna comedian.
That was a pretty okay movie.
Well, but that one also has cat antagonism, and I was just
does,
like, "What is
yeah.
it?" Well, I was like, "What's the deal here?" I love cats, but that's
I love-
Relatives
I'm
cats
more of
are
a-
annoying.
that's
Cats,
a weird
cats are good.
aside,
I
though.
love cats, but I'm more of a dog lover.
I love just about any animal that I
sorry
can
for
come
the
across.
I love I love all animals, but mostly I'm a dog. I love dogs. I had two dogs. I had three dogs. Well, I had two dogs. Now I have two dogs. One passed away. Now I have another. I have two dogs now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm staring at a
Okay.
guinea pig. Staring at a guinea pig right now. I don't see them getting their own Christmas movies. What the hell?
So
They had G-Force.
I have a lizard.
That's not a Christmas movie, but I get what
Clean
you're getting
lizard.
at.
I have a radio slider, and I guess we have a cat named Sassy who
Aw.
singing in the morning at 6:30 in the morning.
Supposedly, that scene with the cat, the producers kind of wanted to cut it, but then the test audiences loved it, so they kept it.
You would
Yeah.
totally not get away with that today.
Well,
there's
that's
a lot in this.
So, they got away with it, and there's something about Mary, I think, with or was that a dog?
That was a dog, and that was the
Yeah, that's
Farrelly
the dog.
brothers, and they tend to not care as much about quote unquote good taste.
Has
And they're
everybody?
they're also able to do it in a way that works for whatever, especially in that film, really works. And it's interesting how even with that in that film, I don't think you could get away with that today. But
Has
I mean,
everybody
isn't that
remember?
isn't that interesting? Like with comedy, it's like you can do so many things that in decades past you could never do in some ways, and then other things in decades past there's no way you could do that today. So it's just, I think that's interesting.
yeah.
Has everybody remember the movie Cats and Dogs?
I do remember that. That was a long time ago.
There was two of them.
Not really.
Not a long time ago for those of us who were a little bit older.
Well, no, I remember. I was like 10 at the time. But,
I was like six.
Wow.
I was like 10. I was like 8 or 9.
Yeah, we're old.
God, I feel old now. My cat apparently likes
Maybe
whiskey
10,
because he
maybe
keeps
10.
stealing mine.
Brandon, wasn't that like your pick for the film of the year that year or something?
I saw that movie. I saw that movie in theaters, and I was like really cracking up from it. I used to love that movie, but when I watch it now, I'm like, what is this?
the CGI has not aged well at all.
I know.
No.
I still can't.
But actually, just to get back to Clark, just to let you, because when I was, the character itself is one that a lot of people can identify with, because a lot of people have been that person who wanted to get this one thing perfect in life. And they never can quite nail that thing.
Yeah.
Be it the perfect, they want to do the perfect job on a project, or they want to have that perfect family vacation. I know when I was a child, I desperately wanted to recreate that one memory that I had when I was really, really young of that perfect Christmas season. Because Christmas Eve used to be my favorite holiday. Not Christmas Day, oddly enough, which, you'd think with a child that would be the one that they'd want because that's when they get the presents. But I had loved Christmas Eve. It was my favorite of all. And I always could identify with him always wanting it to be that perfect one. And when you try hardest, then you can't quite get there. And with me, with so many of my relatives now being passed and having to spend it with very few people now, as opposed to so many in the past. It's something that still rings in my mind today. It's something very important that a concept that some people really do care about is getting that perfect holiday. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of understand why people would identify with him in that manner, trying to
Yeah.
just do
As
that.
far as we talked a lot about Clark when we touched on the Yuppies, but did we have any other thoughts on the other characters? Like,
Well, there were definitely some cameos in here.
Shitter's full.
One of the, was it the father of the wife that it was actually in the Tommyknockers?
are you talking about John Randolph?
The Stephen King movie?
Yep, the Stephen King TV miniseries.
TV miniseries.
He's had a lot of good roles.
Which it was William Hickey was the one in-law with the cigar. Who,
And
I remembered him from Mouse Hunt when I was a kid.
well, he was all the guy with the cigar. He was also played Toulon in the Puppet Master series.
And I remember him
Nice.
from the only major movie I've been part of. He was actually in Major Pain. For that one. But
I would know from Christmas because I celebrate Hanukkah. I'm Jewish.
Okay.
Do you do Hanukkah or do you do Christmaka?
I do Christmaka. That's actually what I do.
now, what is Christmaka?
Christmaka is like a holiday where you do Hanukkah and Christmas at the same time, so you get extra presents and extra.
Okay.
sounds good.
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah.
Can think of worse things.
I'll admit, growing up, my favorite character was probably always Eddie. I didn't like him so much, but he always made me laugh. And
What's funny is that as far as relatability goes,
Yeah.
I actually could kind of not anyone in my immediate family, but I do have a few extended family members that kind of sort of have a few similarities, not anywhere that extreme, but like it's in the ballpark at least. And so I could definitely that's what I honestly thought the movie was at its best when it was dealing with his family's plight plus like my favorite scene is probably with Clark and their daughter in the kitchen late at night. I was like, that's where he really starts to shine as a character. And I do find sympathy for him there because I feel like, okay, look at that, he's doing something selfless, and doing it for a good reason, which is that this girl and her siblings or whatever clearly are not having a great Christmas, and he's trying to the only problem with that scene though is that by the end of the movie it doesn't quite amount to what you're hoping it will, which is where, again, not to compare an incompatible movie necessarily, but like thinking about something like Christmas with the Cranks, where like by the end, this character who also wanted something perfect and his way, kind of a prideful person, learned that it's not all about me and does something pretty selfless. And it's like you're kind of hoping in your head that it'll go that direction, and it just kind of gets into hijinks with the police and everything, and that, which is similar to actually how first vacation ended. But yeah, I do think that would have constituted a stronger ending if they'd have really followed through with that arc.
Okay.
I will admit, I always thought the ending of the movie was just a bit weak, and that was always one of my main criticisms. But as far as the whole idea of like what people were saying about Clark actually wanting what was best for his family, I think like in a sense Eddie was even more so, but he was just so deluded and just out of touch with reality. But he did want the best for his family. It's like the part where Clark said, "Where my cousin or cousin-in-law, whose heart is bigger than his brain," and he's like,
Yeah.
Part.
Well, that and I mean, keep in mind also that for most of the movie, Clark wants his pool and throws a hissy fit when he can't get his pool because he made a stupid decision to put the down payment on something he couldn't afford. So there's that. But then it's like, and I get it. That's part of his arc is that he's supposed to learn that family is the most important thing. And again, like that's kind of there, but it's like that arc isn't anywhere near as strong as it could have been, especially given the setup that was done, with cousin Eddie's daughter and everything. Which again, that's my favorite scene because I feel like that's when the character has the most opportunity for growth.
I think my favorite scene of the whole movie is when the cops show up at the place. And
their house.
Yeah, and they end up showing up at the yuppies place first, and they speaking of the yuppies, the woman of the that was
Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Friends.
Well, she was in there, and then we also forgot to mention Johnny Galecki, who was Rusty, who would obviously go on to play Leonard in the Big Bang Theory.
Raymond's mother.
Yeah, Doris Roberts. Yeah,
it's definitely a cult classic. I mean, I've never seen it, but I heard so many good things about it. So I'm definitely gonna check it out right after do this live stream. I should have watched it before the show, but I didn't have time.
Yeah, actually, one of the fun what am I trying to say things of this franchise is how the two kids are always played by different actors. And that was like
yeah.
They came, and this time around it was Johnny Galecki and Juliette Lewis, who I've never been a huge fan of hers myself. Well, she has had some good roles, but she's.
Oh, I'm a big fan of hers just because I love Natural Born Killers so much.
I'm a big fan of Chevy Chase. I'm a big fan of Chevy Chase, so it should be. This seems like a good movie, so I would enjoy it.
It is a good movie.
I think it's a well done movie.
Yeah, Chevy Chase does a lot of great things. I've seen Caddyshack. Anyone seen that?
That's a classic. Yeah.
It's been a really long time.
I have not seen that forever. I remember not really liking it all that much because I do. I took golf lessons and stuff, so I do know how to play golf and I understand the rules of it. For whatever reason, it just didn't quite work for me. Except for I do really love Rodney Dangerfield.
I love Rodney. And Back to School was a good movie.
Actually, it's kind of funny you're talking about like that one does have a similarity to this one as far as behind the scenes. Again, Chevy Chase has that reputation, and there is the legendary issues that he had with Bill Murray on the set of Caddyshack.
Bill Murray's kind of a prima donna too.
Well, yeah, but in a good way.
Bill Murray is an eccentric prima donna.
Well, he's overall a much. I'm not a huge fan of Bill Murray as a comedic actor, but as a dramatic actor, I think he's really good.
But
Bill Murray is awesome.
Bill Murray's awesome. I love Ghostbusters.
We'll be covering him next week.
Ghostbusters. Do Ghostbusters.
That's going to be a good one to do if we haven't already.
I see those.
Doing the background for this, I'd never heard this before, but it makes me smile. Because you guys said that, John Hughes had written the film, and of course this does have a little bit of that John Hughes 80s vibe to it. But supposedly Chris Columbus was the original director, and he quit because he could not stand Chevy Chase.
Yeah.
And that was part
I
of
wonder why.
And then, of course, he went on to work with Hughes a year or two later on Home Alone, and the rest is history there, another Christmas classic. But, you know.
Home Alone is my favorite. Actually, my favorite not my favorite horror, my favorite comedy of all time. So
Well, it kind of is like a Saw prequel if you want to look at it that way.
Saw prequel, yeah, in a kid's sense, in a sweet, loving, in a sweet comedy sense.
Well, there's like that short film about the adult Kevin that's kind of disturbing. And
with the Porto one.
I don't recall exactly. But,
Actually, though, we were talking about favorite scenes, and the weird thing about this film is my least favorite scene is also my favorite scene of the film, because I am of a split mind, and that is the squirrel scene, which is it's almost like how the bat scene was in The Great Outdoors. It is it's one that I found hilarious, but at the same time, I also found it disturbing just because of the level of destruction done to the house, because there's part of me going, oh my gosh, it's going to cost a fortune. But at the same time, there's a part of me that's just laughing out loud about this squirrel terrorizing everybody in the entire family, running back and forth.
If you notice, if a lot of Christmas movies, there's a lot of destruction in these movies that go on.
Like, how about the part where the dog has actually been in the trash and they don't know it?
Yeah.
He's probably just nosing through the trash.
What do we think about some of the other family members? Was there anyone of note that we have to talk about?
Well, Cousin Eddie's larger than life in the film.
Well, my girlfriend and I were actually remarking at how what's his wife's name? But well, the actress is Beverly D'Angelo, but what's her?
Ellen.
Yeah, we were remarking at how gorgeous her outfit was in the climax with the white lace and everything. I think that Beverly D'Angelo, she manages to be a good on-screen counterpart for Clark, for Chevy Chase as Clark, because she is able to be a strong center for him, but is not also just a pretty face or a fly on the wall. Like I do like that the stress is getting to her too, and that that she's like, "Are you smoking at the house again?" No, I'm not. And, it's just there's a subtle art to being the supporting player for the comedian who is leading the thing, but without just being a fly on the wall,
Yeah.
What can I say? It's Christmas and we're all in misery.
Christmas is like the busiest time of the year, too.
If it isn't Christmas, if no one around you isn't already as miserable as you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, this movie, that's another thing we should bring up, too. This movie has a lot of great quotes.
Yes.
It is definitely quotable. I like the insanity, profanity that he says. I can't quote it exactly, but right when he's standing in the middle and gets all mad and
scene of consciousness torrent when he finds out about the Jelly of the Month Club.
His bonus has been replaced by a certificate for Jelly of the Month for a year, and he goes on this insane cursing rant, which is kind of spectacular to behold.
Well, yeah, that's like the famous scene. If you had to narrow it down to only one, that'd be the famous bit.
I like everything he does after that. Like I start to really have fun with those scenes, like where he starts to like crack.
Yeah, in my brain, I want this thing to turn into the Griswold Chainsaw Massacre.
It's not so much the actual line itself as so much as the reaction, and that's when Eddie and Clark are talking about, as Clark puts it, the tenement on wheels, and Eddie's like, well, don't you go falling in love with it because we're taking it with us when we leave here next month. And they
Next month?
There we go. Someone should make a fan film called National Lampoon's Massacre Vacation.
They can make a horror one. They never made a National Lampoon's Vacation horror movie. They should make.
I don't know. That was the sequel.
Well,
But oh, sorry. Oh no,
Okay.
I was gonna say the busiest time of the year. I looked it up. It is definitely Christmas because I looked it up. I looked up what is the busiest time of the year, busiest holiday of the year. Definitely number one is Christmas. Number two is Thanksgiving, and number three is probably what would you say, guys?
Labor
Well,
Day.
Halloween can be pretty busy, and
Halloween
July
is
can
my
be busy.
busiest time of year.
That's my
Okay.
busiest time of the year too.
Well, Christmas is my least busiest time of year.
Yeah, me too.
I'm on break.
Anyway, Dane, what were you saying, Dane?
I was saying that I think that the one part that because I do think the climax is well, it's very hijinksy in the same vein as the original film, and with the police involved and everything. But that and I do think that they didn't quite pay off the character relationships as strongly as I would have liked. But that being said, as we're going for a more hijinksy ending, I do think that I was like, oh, look at that. Cousin Eddie actually cared to do what Clark said in jest. I was like, oh, look at that. Because I do think out of all the family members, he was probably my favorite just because, he is unhinged and everything, and Randy Quaid is giving it his all.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
well, it's one of those things that like it hits the balance of being cartoony enough to fit into this world that admittedly is more cartoony than it necessarily needed to be in order to work, but also having enough genuine stakes involved in his plight with his family and everything to make it work. So I think that, and also I just think Randy Quaid gets the character.
Quaid in that metal contraption of an RV. I mean, that's the old school RV, and it's rusted a little bit.
I mean, Randy Quaid does an excellent job in this.
Kind of reminds me of the metal on the Jeepers Creepers truck.
Oh yeah, that's a great series.
Well, and speaking of the cartoony kind of aspect and favorites and whatever, the part that always was one of my favorites from when I was a kid, and it remains a favorite, and we haven't mentioned yet, the animated opening sequence with that wonderful song by Mavis Staples.
Yeah.
I just love that song, and the whole sequence just always made me smile. That was just a different.
I thought the animated sequence was cool. The opening up of it. I thought it was entertaining.
Yeah.
And the song is excellent. I mean, that is a great song from the time period.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it interesting? Well, speaking of which, isn't it interesting that the original National Lampoon's Vacation was based on a National Lampoon article that I think John Hughes himself had actually written it, but it was Vacations 59 or whatever, and so this is kind of in a same pattern of 80s movies that are built on 50s nostalgia, and so you have it was that plus Back to the Future obviously was that way, and it's just isn't that interesting that there's always the 30-year cycle with that, and also with movies now that are looking 30 years back to the 80s, and then inevitably next decade it's going to be 30 years back to the 90s and that kind of stuff. But that does kind of tie into the musical opening with the song and everything, and how that does evoke a more innocent 50s time period.
And I think that's going to be. I think that the opening song, "Christmas Vacation." I mean, of course, that song is quintessential '80s and '90s. The way that was done, that style. But and I think it also ties into the next film that we're covering, because that also had a song very similar in that aspect, as it very much ties into the time, but also has kind of become a classic in that sense. But I mean, of course, classics can be born out of movies that way. I mean, White Christmas was born out of a movie, Holiday Inn,
Yeah.
which was an excellent film, but nobody ever watches that during the holidays because they tend to watch White Christmas. But and most people don't even know that.
You know,
Yeah,
but
I knew that, although for whatever reason I have actually not seen Holiday Inn, even though White Christmas is the movie that my family and I always made sure to watch
Holiday Inn
every
is
year.
quite good.
what's interesting is that the guy who was behind the animation of the main title sequence,
Yeah.
he was also the director of Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest.
Really?
Interesting.
I'll be right back, guys. He's got that look in his eye.
You're talking about 30-year cycles, though. The remake of Vacation was, I think, exactly 30 years after, was it European? I think?
Yes.
That one was pretty. What'd you guys think of that one?
Like I
Never
say, it was
saw
I
it.
had a hard time with that one.
Yeah. Ed Helms did a good job of playing a Griswold. I will say that.
I
Yeah.
saw. Oddly enough, I saw that one before I saw Vacation, the original Vacation.
So, did anyone else have anything else to add to the film before we wrap up this discussion?
Well, nobody mentioned that Aunt Beverly, our old senile aunt in the movie,
Right?
was actually the original voice for Betty Boop.
I did see
And,
that,
Oh
yes.
wow.
yeah, and Olive Oil from Popeye.
Oh wow.
She had a very amusing role as Woody Allen's mother in the New York stories.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yes.
That was one of her last roles. But I think this was her last role, wasn't it? May
I
Quest?
think so.
Yeah, or just about. There, I mean, yeah. Again, a lot of the cast either had been veterans or became big names later on.
Surprisingly, there are a lot of stunt people involved in this film as well.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly with what they do with them.
I was gonna say that's not shocking whatsoever.
I wouldn't think, but yeah, especially like, has there actually been a mention of that crazy house and the generations of tacky houses that have tried to follow suit?
Well, I don't think a lot of houses have tried to follow as much suit as the light sequence, as you can see. And I just love how everyone keeps turning off the lights on him, making him think that something's wrong with the whole damn thing.
Right.
Well, it's a series of gaudy upper middle class white suburban Chicago families in John Hughes films.
Yeah.
And,
It's something that I could never. It's kind of weird how families in that I could never really relate to growing up, but at the same time I could, because that's what they always said. That's the ideal. Of course, I never fit the ideal because of
Yeah.
how I grew up. I mean, I grew up not so wealthy. I grew up in the country, but that was what was projected as this is what's normal. I mean, things like the Adventures of Pete and Pete, which I still identify with strongly. I still don't know why, because I didn't really experience any of that.
The house was actually called was owned by Madison Boyd Jones. It was
Oh.
Madison Boyd Jones House on 727 West Kenneth Road, Glendale, California. So,
Well, I can relate to you there, Brandon, because like whenever this was a big thing with me and with movies and stuff, is like there was always something that was presented as being the norm, especially when it came to children's films, where it was like the family that lives in this kind of house with the German Shepherd, or not the German Shepherd, the Golden Retriever, and it just like it was always. It's kind of it's a weird situation where you see something presented as the norm, but you clearly don't fit it, and then as you're trying to differentiate, you're like, well, now what do I do? And I'm sure that that's something that everybody goes through to various degrees, but it's particularly interesting whenever it comes to comedies and to Christmas films, because those are, again, heavily rooted in relatability and subjectivity. And that can be a precarious position to be in when you don't really fit that mold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like with Christmas Story. You were talking about that earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really could not relate a lot to Christmas Story, and I didn't see it that early on. If we ever cover it here, we'll of course have to go back to it. But I still have an enjoyment for the film, which is a strange thing. But at the same time, I guess there is that nostalgia again, back to that whole idea of really wanting that perfect Christmas, of wanting things to be that Norman Rockwellian type thing that I've never seen before. Something that would just be the cool Christmas.
That reminds me of, I think, maybe my favorite line from Roger Ebert's reviews. Gremlins is a cross between Norman Rockwell's vision of Christmas and Hollywood's vision of the blood-sucking monkeys of Voodoo Island. He really said that. So great. Voodoo Island.
Well, the thing is, I guess.
And I guess speaking
I
to
don't
real
know.
nostalgia, the Christmas Story setting, like in 1940s Indiana, that's when my dad would have grown up, and my dad was a little kid in Indiana, kind of like that, and he had similar stories about being little in that time period and that kind of place that seemed to kind of jive with A Christmas Story. So the nostalgia argument for that, I mean, really holds a lot of weight,
holds
I
water
guess.
for you.
Yeah.
It's and again, I'm a weird duck in general, but especially when it comes to stuff that most people shared experiences that I think a lot of people have just in life. That my life has been so not that way that I guess that's kind of why I like why I have loved movies so much, is because it's like I was able to learn about the way other people are in a way that I couldn't really in my real life. And, so that's why it's a little precarious for me whenever movies are trying to rely on the fact that you have had these similar experiences as part of its enjoyment factor. Because usually 9 times out of 10, I haven't. And so therefore, I'm hoping that the movie will try to go the extra mile to get me up to speed, more or less, on an emotional level. I mean, and not to say that this, doesn't have that in it. It's just, it's a fine line, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Yep.
So apparently, I found a little bit more out on the house. Evidently, it was or mansion. It's evidently also known as the Bel Air Mansion, and also it was the inspiration for the mansion called Terra in Gone with the Wind.
Oh, nice.
Where'd you find this out?
I actually found it out by Googling it.
Oh, cool.
Google's a very smart person.
You can find anything on Google.
Well, it used to be Ask Jeeves, but I don't think
Whoever used that website.
I did. I remember Jeeves.
I think you looked it up on Wikipedia or something. For some...
Yeah, Google and Wikipedia are my two go-to sources for things.
I usually look stuff on Wikipedia or Google, or Yahoo. Anything I can look. I'll look it up on any site.
Well, evidently the movies that were filmed at this same house were also Better Off Dead. The $6 Million Man was used.
What's Better Off Dead?
For a library.
It's
It
a
was-
weird. It's a weird comedy from what, the 80s, early 90s.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Is
Well,
it a
good.
Christmas?
Good, but it's weird. No, it's not a Christmas movie.
The house that the ones next door, the Yuppie couple, apparently is the same house the Murtaughs lived in Lethal Weapon. So that's kind of
Woo!
very different movie there.
Shared
Which,
universe.
hey, what? Well, isn't it?
Identical movie.
Doesn't the
Evidently, it
first
was
Lethal Weapon take
Superman.
place on Christmas or around the Christmas season?
What's that?
I think the third one took place around Christmas.
One of them did. I think it might have been the third, or it might have been the first.
Yeah.
I thought it was the first one, but yeah, we should be talking about that at some point.
Well, when we made our
Actually,
list
the
last week of Christmas movies, Lethal Weapon showed up on a couple of lists I looked at, and I was curious about it. But I haven't seen that one in a minute.
yeah, after doing that list, we found a lot of movies that took place around Christmas time. But actually, one thing I forgot to talk about was the person who was one of the neighbors was, of course, Elaine on Seinfeld, which by the way was helped me to not like the neighbors more because I hate Seinfeld with a passion. But
That suck.
I love Seinfeld.
It was
because
very
the most
likable.
evil
favorite
group
show.
of people ever.
I only watched the first episode, and I was like, I could live with this or without this.
I love that show.
But she, like I said, she has a recurring role in Arrested Development that's actually a pretty nice role for the most part. And
Julia Louis-Dreyfus, yeah, her role in there is really funny.
And the guy is Christopher Guest's brother, which you don't see a lot of Nicholas Guest, but Christopher Guest is awesome. So it's like that's kind of a fun connection too.
Yeah.
Christopher
Chris-
Guest is,
Christopher
of course,
Guest is
missing here.
Genius.
We
If
need
this-
to include Christopher Guest in this thing one of these days.
If Christopher Guest had done this, then it would have been a masterpiece. But
Very
of a very
different film.
Yeah, I was gonna say of a very different sort. But
All right.
Alrighty. So, did anyone else have anything else to add?
Well, I guess not.
Anybody else love? I'm just gonna name off some of my favorite moments. Like when, so the tree that they went out to the woods to get gets burned down, and this is more or less timed with Clark's breakdown, and so he's like, where are you gonna get another tree at this hour? And in a state of delirium, he just grabs the chainsaw, and the family's like, he's got that look in his eye. It's like, go talk to him, Russ.
Kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a joke. I just love the way that goes. He's got the saw, going, and the kid's like, "Hey, Dad, how you doing?" And he just looks at the kid and revs the saw. And
Yeah.
his son's like, "Good talk," and leaves. Or it's like, "No, you can't leave. We're all in this together." It's like, "You're crazy. Don't piss me off, Art."
No, I like
So
the part
that's where I got that from. I say that line all the time. Don't piss me off.
where they can't
Same delivery.
And he's like, "We checked all the lights, didn't we, Russ?" And then Russ starts like, "Oh, look at the time!" He starts rolling. We gotta do the homework, feed the hog, all that kind of stuff.
Pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
You feel bad for him because it's all that bullshit he went through with those lights, and he just didn't have them plugged in. Goddamn.
I've been that kid where my father had me lay a barbed wire fence over 100 acres worth of land and forest area, and I can tell you that that's the whole thing. If I can vanish in those moments, I would. So I can definitely relate to him.
Something always happens on Christmas Eve, on these Christmas movies. There's always something that's happening, destruction and crazy, messes happen. You notice that, right?
Oh,
Definitely.
Yeah.
So,
that actually does remind me of something that. So this was obviously a John Hughes script. This was just 1 year before Home Alone, and then after Home Alone, more or less, John Hughes' career changed from being the guy who wrote all of the really relatable, insightful, uh, kind of soul probing teen movies of the 80s to being the pratfally, slapsticky guy who did Home Alone imitations for more or less the rest of his career.
Wacky man.
Pretty much, and it was just sad because it's like, this was the guy who was able to do, Ferris Bueller's Day Off and The Breakfast Club and these movies that were funny, but they also had just a lot of, they like people compared him to like Rebel Without a Cause, and it's like, and well deserved because they were really probing into the way that the 80s teenager was feeling at the time.
What was with that title? He had several causes.
Well, he did write Home Alone, but he didn't direct it.
No, he did. It was Christopher Columbus directed that one and the second one.
So
actually, Christopher Columbus can get acting out of children that nobody else can. So I got to give him that.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny. He did the first 2 Home Alones, first 2 Harry Potters, and only stuck to 2s for some reason.
Well, with Home Alone, only the first 2 count.
Alrighty. So unless anyone else has anything else to add, I think at this moment,
if you go to Best Buy, they have a limited steelbook for National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. It's 14 right now. I think it's a little high priced because you don't get much in terms of extras. You just get like a commentary, and it was an okay commentary, but there wasn't anything that really blew my mind except for there was kind of something funny with the squirrel scene that they brought up. So they had a trained squirrel to like interact with the dog and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then before they were going to shoot, like the squirrel died. And so they had to use like a new squirrel that hadn't rehearsed or whatever the technical term is. And it was kind of funny because they were like, well, we felt bad about it. It's like, oh, we asked the trainer, it's like, oh no, what happened? It's like, well, they don't live that long. And it's like, oh, it died of old age.
Uncle Buck was a TV series?
What?
Apparently. I must have missed that.
Interesting.
What?
Yeah, evidently Uncle Buck was a sitcom.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
That was a movie.
I know.
That's random.
18 episodes. Well, you're looking at the John Hughes credits, aren't you?
Yep.
I did the same thing, yeah. Uncle Buck was a classic.
That's a great movie. That's another Christmas movie, isn't it?
And actually,
John Hughes.
when we were debating Thanksgiving films, there's a John Hughes film right there. We didn't do, maybe next year, Plane, Trains, and Automobiles, but whatever.
I didn't think about that one.
A lot of John Hughes movies. John Hughes was great.
But, yeah.
Alrighty. Well,
The great John Candy.
Ready. So, I think on that note, I'm going to start rolling around to see who's who and who wants to go on and talk about where they're from. So, Kyle, I'm going to ask you where you do your reviews and who you are, first of all.
I'm Kyle Rapport, and I do my reviews on Movie Buff One. My YouTube channel is Movie Buff One, and I do movie reviews, DVD updates, and around the town videos, vlogs, and the convention videos, and etc. etc.
Alrighty, cool, man. And going over to Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure, I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I am a body positive horror artist and alternative model. You can find me on Facebook, Patreon, and Instagram. My Instagram handle is at 3RDEYE0PEN. I'm also the makeup artist for horror punk band Rat Bat Spider. You can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. I'm also a dead girl for Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics horror TV show. You can watch episodes at vimeo.com/ddcc. I'm also a Tromet with Trauma Entertainment, and you can find all things Trauma at trauma.com. I also perform and produce for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. You can find us currently on Facebook. Right now, we're looking for performers for our 2019 season. So if you're interested in performing with us, shoot us a message on our Facebook page. And I'm also an editor for Movies Galore of Milwaukee. And we have our next lineup of films set up for the next few weeks. We're taking a couple weeks off for the holiday, but next week we have Scrooged lined up for everybody.
All righty. And going over to Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm a horror collector here in Milwaukee. I have a channel for pickups, interviews, and a bunch of other stuff that's planned. It's still somewhat under construction, but I do have a handful of reviews already up. I'm the Crypt of Horrors on YouTube. I'm also the Crypt of Horrors on Twitter, where you can hear my bizarre rants on various things. I have an Instagram for my collection at DHR Hunter. I'm also somewhat involved with the Inside Movies Galore page, which I'll be doing more work on that probably after the new year. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me at the moment.
Okay. Going over to Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. We are a YouTube channel that focuses on the physical media side of things, be it movies, video games, or music, though we do tend to concentrate mostly on the movies. We do reviews. We talk about what is coming out for the week, pick up videos, and the occasional top 15. Some of the more recent things that we have done, of course, a review of Christmas Cruelty, which sadly was not as good as for me as I had wanted it to be. We have also an upcoming top 15, which should be for the season, which covers Christmas movies that we have watched that we wished were classics that are not on the mainstream. I also occasionally do work with Inside Movies Galore, doing occasional reviews for the thing and occasional compilations. Of course, if you have the chance, check us out on YouTube. We do love having our new people. We're hoping to eventually get to 100 subscribers one day, which would be a great thing. That would be our feat.
Alrighty, going over to Kotobuki Jake. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hi, I'm Jake, and I'm also here in Central Virginia, and I frequently guest on Septum Sin versus the World. And like Brandon said, we've got a real fun top 15 coming up. I think we had a good time with it, and the idea was just basically trying to highlight the stuff that people might overlook, but that could be considered holiday classics, all in how you look at it. And I have been taking full advantage of, well, the snow days for one, but also certain other more days off than usual, that sort of thing. And I've been doing a lot of review videos. I've got one lined up for the Sentai Premium Edition sets that'll cover 2 series, and I have 4 recorded and ready to go for various Criterion films in my collection, and I'm working on a 5th. I need a chance to get these edited before they'll get posted, and who knows when that'll be. But there is a lot coming down the pike, hopefully within the next few weeks. I do also have my own solo channel, Kotobuki Jake. I don't update it very often. And obviously right now things are dormant for the winter. It's mostly a nature-themed channel. I may get out and do something about the snowfall, but I probably not. But and then other than that, just like I said, I've been slinging Christmas trees. We're coming to, thank God, come to an end of that for now. And I guess that'll do it for about now.
Alrighty. Going over to Dane. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am Dane Kyle, a filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and some recent things. I have a segment in the Trauma movie Clownsploitation, which has just dropped on Trauma Now, and you can watch it there. And I've got 4 short films in 4 different anthologies. Now I'm just turning my energies towards writing spec scripts to get those sent out to some development people that I know, see if anything takes, and hopefully that'll lead to bigger and better things.
Awesome. And my name is David Streggy. I run Inside Movies Galore, but I kind of run it with all of you because every week it's always something different, and I always give an opportunity for the host or something like that. But I also blog at Movies Galore Milwaukee. I have not been paying attention to that blog lately. I've been doing a lot of YouTube reviews. So just recently I did a couple of reviews to check out. Go ahead and check them out. I believe Red Christmas is now uploaded, and also I just recently I'm trying to finish up with some of the films that I wanted to get out before I started my Christmas holiday holiday of films. So now I'm starting to transition into holiday films to review in the spirit of Christmas, so to speak. In any case, thank you for listening, everyone. Hopefully, you didn't exactly kill your cat tonight. Or find a squirrel that we might not have missed, or something like that. Maybe a tree fell in your window or something like that. I don't know. But don't let any of these things get you down. So, in any case, hopefully, like, share, and subscribe, and look forward to next week with Scrooged and Bill Murray. Say good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.